Thank you.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome. You are here for Talking with Strangers, the hidden keys to tech career success. My name is Albert. I'm the founder of Albert's List. We're a job search, side hustle, and AI company, helping you become the most resilient professional possible. And, in part of becoming the most resilient professional possible means being able to communicate and communicate well with others, especially in a job market like this, where every interview matters, every networking event matters, and that human connection can be just enough to get you over the top so you can land that next job. And so, here to talk with me about it today is Bill Lennan. He's the author of a new book, and he's also taught over 100 people how to replicate his results from going from a shy introvert to somebody who can work cross collaboratively as a product manager and do so much more with his career and achieve the level of satisfaction that he's always desired. Before I go ahead and hand it over to him, this webinar is being recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel afterwards. We'll follow up with you. And if you have any questions, put them in the webinar chat and the Q&A section, and we'll get to them when we get to them or at Bill's discretion. In addition, I also encourage you to be social and get out of your shell in case that's how you're feeling right now. Share your LinkedIn in the webinar chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from, and perhaps share one thing that you're really excited to learn about today. So without further ado, Bill, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for spending
Thank
your
you.
your Tuesday afternoon with us.
Tuesday, it's Tuesday. Yeah.
When I know
Yeah.
you could be doing so many other things. We appreciate the audience and the ability, the privilege of sharing your genius. Over to you.
Thank you. That is an awesome intro. Like you should be the pitch man for me all the time before I do
Yeah.
any talk anywhere. That was awesome.
Well, that's just how we do it, right? Because, we are here to deliver
Yeah.
value on every single webinar because, we meet people sometimes at their most vulnerable, right? And
Yeah, it's true.
being able to communicate is communicate to ask for help, communicate to ask for what you need is one of the most foundational skills that you can possess. And especially when it's a job that you need that'll bring you income. So,
Yep, exactly.
you know,
So hopefully we can help people out and
yeah.
and solve those kinds of problems for them.
Yep.
So hopefully I'm sharing the screen now. You guys
Yep. I
should
can
all be
see it. Yep.
seeing that. Awesome. Let me get rid of some of the extra windows I'm looking at and get to where I want to be. Okay, controlling all this. Ignore the man behind the curtain. So talking with strangers, the keychain to tech to career success. So here's what you get today. I'm a big fan of predictable outcomes, like I think a lot of people are. And here's what I hope that you're going to get from this talk. First of all, is a framework and a system that allows you to flip social anxiety into social confidence. The second thing is how to use that system. Actually, I didn't update this slide from the last talk. My apologies. The second thing is how to use this system to do interviewing much, much better. I've used a different system on interviews since I was in college, and it's gotten me very different results than other people have had. And then third, how to also, if we have time, third's a bonus. Hopefully we get to it. It's how to use the system to get noticed and promoted at work, or maybe just to survive layoffs. That's the bonus thing. So let's jump into it. I've seen the same friction across every software team and with most of the entrepreneurs that I have worked with in my time in Silicon Valley. These were smart engineers. They're great problem solvers, but they're hampered because they're not effective and relaxed communicators. They have a fundamental social anxiety that blocks their success. And they all think it's an unsolvable problem. And when I started my tech career, I was one of those socially anxious engineers. So who's this Bill guy? My career has ranged from early stage startups all the way to Google. I've worked everything from SaaS to e-commerce and social media. Along the way, I had to build a system to overcome my own communication friction, my social anxiety. And thanks to this work, conversations turned walls that I was seeing into open doors. And then as Albert said, I trained 100 plus people how to replicate my successes. And then I decided, what the heck, I should write a book also on how to get past social anxiety. Why should you care about this, right? So the first question, and I wish I could see you all, but who wants to advance their career? To advance your career, you're going to have to interview, right? You're going to need to network and find allies, and then you'll have to be able to persuade executives. And all of these are parts of career advancement that require you to be comfortable talking with people. Maybe you're an entrepreneur. Again, you need to network. Here at Hacker Dojo, there's a bunch of entrepreneurs that have desk space here. It's a co-working space. Networking here is critically important for these people to achieve their success with the businesses they're trying to build. Also, as an entrepreneur, you have to pitch effectively. And it is way easier to pitch when walking into the room and talking with strangers, you're comfortable rather than being afraid of them. And then, by the way, if you're successful, you're gonna have to lead your own people. And communication skills are a key part of leading your own people. Here's another reason why this matters: parenting. Every kid deserves to have a parent who's a role model that communicates well. One of the reasons that I started down this path to get rid of my social anxiety was I discovered that my wife at the time was pregnant. And I had this realization that I wanted to be a better role model for my kids. I did not want to be the socially anxious parent. And also, if I had a system that I could teach other people, I could help them if they became socially anxious. Coming out of COVID, both of my kids had problems going back to school when they had to go back on campus. One of them was going to college, and it was brand new for him because he'd been in high school before. The other one was going to high school from middle school, and they both had a bunch of struggles with the new world. They were able to use a system that I created and have a great time and really have a minimal amount of time when they were struggling emotionally with going to school. And then, by the way, this is even great for dating. The mother of my kids and I had to go through a divorce in the middle of my social anxiety journey. And after the dust had settled and I started dating again, it was incredibly easy because, well, talking with strangers was easy. One of the things that I discovered in the process is that social anxiety is not a biological problem. I spent decades thinking it was, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was wrong. So then the question becomes, well, what is social anxiety? I see it as three things. Number one is a flawed set of beliefs and mental models. And this is important because you can't operate beyond the scope of your beliefs and mental models, but you can get new mental models and new beliefs. Second of all, it's a lack of skills and a lack of understanding that the skills actually matter. We don't talk about the levels of communication and the skills required at every level. We do this with math. Math is a really good example of a system where you learn things in levels. We learn how to count, we learn how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, fractions. As we're moving up the stack, communication is very much the same way, but we don't talk about it like that. And one of the things that I learned was how to think about the levels and how to learn and apply skills in those levels. And then, of course, when you have skills, to get good at them, you need to practice. It's kind of like if you want to be a good swimmer, right? If you want to be a good swimmer, you have to be in the water. You're not going to be a good swimmer because you've read 100 books about swimming. You need to actually be in the water. Social anxiety is a lot like being afraid of the water because you can't swim and you don't know that swimming lessons exist. So how do you flip the anxiety? Well, first of all, we learn and we adopt better beliefs. As I said, everything in the world is contained in our beliefs, and we can upgrade our beliefs. And that's really the starting point for building social confidence. The second thing is learning very deliberate skills as they're appropriate. Nobody, when they start off as a 5-year-old learning how to do math, starts off at calculus, because you don't understand the fundamentals. You can't effectively understand what's going on. You have to work your way up through the skill levels before you can jump into calculus. I mean, you have to work your way up to skill levels before you can do multiplication, for that matter, right? So we're learning very deliberate skills, and we're doing consistent practice. And I don't know about you, but growing up, I had a lot of homework in school, and this was the consistent practice. So this is how we build new behaviors. And when we build new behaviors like this, talking with strangers becomes a default. And so rather than shying away, staring at our shoes, or maybe like a lot of people do, we're staring at our phone, we're actually engaging with people, right? And the more we do it, the easier it gets. Now, the way that we assemble this to make it easy for everybody is something that we call recipes. And I want to give a hat tip to BJ Fogg from Stanford. He has a book called Tiny Habits, and he talks about using recipes. And that's the exact same model that we use to have recipes for beating social anxiety and becoming a better communicator. So here's the first recipe that I created, and I still use today. Step 1, go to Starbucks. Before I walk in the door, do 5 to 10 long exhale breaths before I open the door. Open the door, walk in, order a drink. And by the way, you can order water. This is not about a revenue opportunity for Starbucks. It's not what I'm trying to do. Then when the drink arrives, ask the barista, how's your day going? And whatever they say, just say, thanks, I hope the rest of the day goes well. And then leave and congratulate yourself for completing 1 rep. That's it. That's the recipe. This interaction, it takes about 2 minutes. And by the way, you got to remember to congratulate yourself, because that's a key part of embedding the recipes, is that self-congratulation. And again, this only takes about 2 minutes, right? This is just the initial starting point and the practice of starting conversations with strangers. By the way, I still do this today all the time. I think about everything in the world as a system, whether I understand it or not. And so the recipe that I used at Starbucks, why is somebody texting me? Okay. The recipe that I use at Starbucks is the beginning point of a progressive system. And as we're thinking about this, social anxiety is a type of anxiety, it's a type of fear. And so we have to be thinking about, how do we manage the fear so that everything else can work? The starting point of all of this is, what am I doing that's allowing me to manage my fear? And fear is very manageable, right? So I mentioned we start off doing long exhale breath. Long exhale breath is a skill to manage your heart rate and your cortisol level. And cortisol is the fight or flight hormone. We want to be relaxed and confident in our conversations and not thinking about either fighting or running away, right? So that's why the breath is so important. And then I pick Starbucks because I want to practice in a supportive environment, because I want to have as many variables be easy as possible, right? And I know that there's Starbucks everywhere. I can go practice anytime I want to. And the baristas are paid to be nice to people. And so I know that if I need to go practice, I'm reducing the negative potential variables by going to a Starbucks, and the people there are paid to be nice. The next part is scripting, right? I ask the same question every time I go to Starbucks. How's your day going? I've memorized it. I also ask people how their day is going anytime I meet somebody who's a stranger, like in every context. I say that at the grocery store, I say that at the car parts store, I say that at the hardware store. It's always a great opener. I use that as the opener on job interviews, right? I use that over and over again. And so when we have a script that we can easily memorize, it's one more piece to help reduce the fear. One of the fears being, what the heck am I going to say, right? Scripts are short, easy to remember, and they're reusable. And then every recipe has a time box. So that starting point going to Starbucks was just 2 minutes, right? And I figure I can handle anything for 2 minutes. I could almost hold my breath that long, or I used to be able to anyway. As we get comfortable, we go to longer recipes. When I started doing this, the first thing I did was that 2-minute recipe, right? It took me 2 weeks, about 15 reps to have Starbucks be super easy. So it doesn't take a ton of time, right? And there's people I've trained that they've gotten super comfortable in 6 or 7 reps. Everybody's a little bit different, right? I might be slower to learn than other people. So the time box allows you to know how long you're doing it. So there's a 2-minute time box, 5-minute, 15, and 30. And once you can do 30, you're good to go. And the last thing is we remember to congratulate ourselves after every rep, right? That's one of those core pieces that helps us instill a new habit. So I keep talking about beliefs, right? So for me to do this, I had to change some of my core beliefs or mental models, right? Personal growth always starts by changing our beliefs, and getting over social anxiety, it's no different, right? There was 3 key beliefs that I had to start changing to open the doors to social confidence. The first belief I had, which was flawed, was that everybody else is comfortable talking with strangers. There's 20 plus of you on this call. Clearly, there's more than just me in the world who's uncomfortable talking with strangers, right? Or who was. What I've learned since I started doing this work is that in reality, most people have some kind of social anxiety. And it took me getting over my own fear to really be able to see this, right? Everybody has it very, very differently. I've got a friend who is super comfortable being up on stage and performing, but really doesn't want to talk one-on-one to anybody in the audience, right? Public speaking is super easy for them, but not one-on-ones afterwards or before. The next flawed belief I had was that I have to have a good story to tell. And what I discovered was that asking questions to get other people to talk about their lives relieved me of having to tell any kind of stories, right? I just asked them questions and guided the conversation. And most people are really happy to talk about themselves if you're guiding the conversation by asking them questions. And as an interesting bonus, what I've realized is that if I'm asking people questions and they're having an interesting conversation, they want to come back for more. Like they want to come back and talk to me again. And this applies in all kinds of contexts, right? It applies in networking, it applies in parenting, it applies in dating. I've got a podcast now, and almost every guest that I interview at the end says, hey, you know, this was really cool. I'd love to do this again sometime. Using questions to get other people to talk it's such a superpower, and it's such a reliever of fear if you're worried about having to tell interesting stories. The third fear that I had to get over, the third belief that I had to get over, is that everything is a final exam. And the reality is that everything is actually practice. Like this right now is practice for a talk I'm going to do a year from now, right? This is one of the practice pieces. The first time that I gave this talk, which was 2 months ago, I knew it was practice for some time in the future when Albert let me get up here and talk in front of you folks. Everything is practice. And what's really cool about everything being practice is the more practice you do, the more self-confident you become, because you understand a predictable outcome. And this is true whether you're walking, right? Or you're riding a bicycle or driving a car, and even in social situations. So practice is one of those unspoken keys to social anxiety. And if we're talking about, you know, job related, right? I network with a lot of people outside of the work environment, which makes it easy to network with people inside the work environment. And because I talk to all these people, going to job interviews is incredibly easy because it's just more people that I've never met before. The next part of this is skills. And as we adopt new beliefs, we need to have the skills to back it up. As an example, I think the water's a playground, right? I love to be in the water. I've got a long list of water-related sports that I've been doing for most of my life. The starting point for being comfortable in the water is knowing how to swim. If you thought the water was a playground, but you had no idea how to swim, that could be dangerous. So you want to have the skills to back up your perspective, right? It's important to understand how the skills interplay with the belief structures you've got, right? So I mentioned slow exhale breath. Breath is a very simple way to manage our heart rate, our cortisol level, and our stress. In long exhale breath, we inhale for count of 3, and then we exhale for count of 6 to 9. My partner works in mental health. This is one of the skills that she uses with her clients on a daily basis. And you can use it when you're super stressed, or you can use it when you don't want to be stressed, right? It works on both ends of the spectrum. The second skill that I think about, and if you're anybody who works and has a calendar, this should be an easy concept, is time boxing. Everything fits into a time box on my calendar, right? I've got a conference call I'm doing with somebody. It's going to be a 15-minute call, or maybe it's going to be a 30-minute call, or I'm doing a presentation here and it's going to be an hour. There's always a time box. That first recipe at Starbucks was just 2 minutes long, and then I incremented up from there. Time boxing gives us predictability and an end point, right? I know this talk won't go on forever. For me, 2, 5, 15, and 30-minute time boxes gave me space to work my skills, talk with people, and not feel like I was overwhelmed. And I did this incrementally, so that every time as I got comfortable in one time box, I could look to do the next time box. I mentioned going to Starbucks, you're picking an environment for success. I'm very deliberate about that. When I started off going to Starbucks, I was like, this is the only place I can do this. I couldn't do it anyplace else. And then when Starbucks got to be easy, I started doing that 2-minute recipe at the grocery store, which for whatever reason, didn't feel as safe to me as Starbucks did. And then once the grocery store became easy, I started doing it at the car parts store. And then once that became easy, I was doing it at the hardware store. And I was doing this more and more and more places as I got comfortable. And so now I can do it in any environment, that recipe, because I've worked my way up deliberately. I mentioned scripts. This is the last of the skills, right? Scripts can be recycled anywhere. I've got half a dozen questions that I consistently pull from when I'm meeting people that are strangers. How's your day going? Is the first one, right? When I'm at a networking event, I always ask people, what brought you to this event? And that's just another one of the questions I can ask anywhere, right? Part of the reason I do the script is I always know I've got something to say that's going to help move the conversation forward, where the other person is actually going to be doing most of the speaking. So I don't have to have that fear of, I don't know what to say in this context. It's just ask a question, right? And again, we're talking about recyclable questions. They're broad questions. Having that certainty lets me know that I can talk to anybody at any point in time, because I can just ask them any out of my very short list of questions. So what do scripting questions look like? So first of all, it wasn't obvious before, they need to be open-ended. How's your day going is a very open-ended kind of question, and it's a great start. I try very hard to avoid asking any kind of question that's going to be yes or no in this kind of a context, right? There are contexts where I do ask yes or no questions, but they're not in the networking and getting to know people context, right? Again, having reusable questions reduces uncertainty. And I mentioned fear management is a key reason for doing all of this, because once the fear goes away, then I can just be relaxed and comfortable in the conversation. I want reusable questions as much as I possibly can. That's one of the core elements of this, that I can take this anywhere. And again, I want to make sure that I can relax and just enjoy the conversation. So the key to this is practicing. And I practice everywhere, right? I use that 2-minute script at coffee shops, at restaurants, at grocery stores. And I even ask like every podcast guest that I have, I start off with, how's your day going? Because most people enjoy predictability, when we practice something a lot, we're programming ourselves to trust the outcome of the behavior we've engaged in, right? I know that if I'm walking and I put one foot in front of the other, I'll move across the room and I won't fall on the floor. One of the things that was a real surprise to me was that my self-confidence improved as a function of practicing. Because I would ask people, how's your day going? And nobody told me I was an asshole to go away. Everybody said, oh, my blah, blah, blah. And I would say, thanks, hopes the rest of the day goes well. And they would smile and say, thanks, hope your day goes well too. And so because conversations kept ending with people smiling at me, I was like, oh, this is working out really, really well, right? I was incrementally building self-confidence, little small increments, but little small increments add up over time. I mentioned levels a couple minutes ago. Communication skills exist in levels just like math or swimming or juggling, right? The starting point is that 2-minute recipe with the simplest of scripts. But after 2 weeks, that first recipe was easy and I wanted the next level. And that's when I went to 5-minute networking events. I used the same basic recipe as the 2-minute. I just added a couple more questions to the script, right? It's a simple increment to add 2 or 3 more questions to be able to go to a networking event, ask somebody how's their day going, and they tell me how their day is going. And then I say, whatever the next question is from my script, and they answer it. And then I ask them the third question from the script. And usually by then we've burned up the time slot for them to speak. And then they're like, hey, what about you, right? So I did 5-minute networking events. I think I went to 3 events, and that probably meant I talked to maybe 25 people. And then I started doing 30-minute networking, which means you got to add a couple more questions in, right? And they're going to start asking you questions. And often what I found is people would ask me the same questions I'd ask them. And usually when they would say, why are you here? I would say some version of, I'm here to work on getting over my social anxiety. And this is practice for me to get over my social anxiety. And people would always go like, really? Wow, you don't seem like you have social anxiety. And that turned into a whole conversation about what the heck I've been doing. Each one of these things has a time box. It's got scripted questions. And I always did slow exhale breath before I arrived, and sometimes in between the people I was talking with. And I also congratulated myself at the end after every rep. You got to do the congratulation at the end. That's a critical element, right? So those are some of the levels. There's more levels. As I was working on getting over my social anxiety and talking with strangers, I also was starting to present at work, which I'd never done before, right? So I had to learn another set of skills. And again, it was incremental recipes. I started off very, very small, very, very short, in front of people, my software team, who I knew really, really well. And I asked them if they would volunteer to be an audience that I could practice my presentation skills. And so I went through multiple levels of that until I was doing presentations for the whole company. And again, I made it very small increments so that no increment felt impossible, right? It was little tiny increments as I was moving along and as opportunities were opening up for me. And then public speaking became another level. And again, when I realized I needed to get over my fear of public speaking, there was another set of recipes. There was more skills, more practice, but it was the same incremental approach. And again, I had a time box, I had a script, I was doing long exhale breath and congratulating myself at the end of the presentation. I use the same structure for recipes as much as I possibly can. So now let's talk about hacking interviews, because Albert's List is all about getting hired. So when I got hired at Google, it was both very interesting and it was also very, very fast. It was interesting because I only talked with the hiring manager. And it was fast because the whole interview lasted about 20 minutes. And I asked most of the questions. I started using this system in college, jobs that I got there. What I noticed was if I went to the interview and I asked more questions, I tended to get hired. And so I was trying to ask smarter questions. And so for the Google interview, I asked the hiring manager to explain the problem that they wanted solved. And I said, it's because the description's kind of vague. And at every other interview I've been at, I've asked some version of that same question to really talk me through the job description and what's going on here. Hiring managers like it when candidates ask smart questions. Your questions provide insights to the hiring manager on how you think, which is really important, and how you approach problem solving. And we're all getting hired to solve problems at companies. Doesn't matter what the job title is, what the level is, ultimately you're solving a problem for the business. When you're asking smart questions, first of all, they give you valuable intelligence about the role. In Google, for example, what I actually had to do when I got hired there was completely different from what the job description said. And the hiring manager was able to actually tell me what was going on, but he couldn't write it in the job description because of privacy concerns. And so me asking about that, I actually got to find out what the heck the role was all about because the written description was horrible. The other thing about this is that if you're learning more about the role and what's going on, you get to share short, interesting stories about how your skills have solved problems for other companies that are contextually related to this company's problems. Those stories should be short, right? It's what's the problem that the company had, what was the outcome, and then a very short, very high overview of what you did to solve the problem. You want them to stay curious about you. That's really the goal, is them to be curious. And if anybody says, hey, can you tell me more detail, which I've had happen, I just say, can we do this later? Because right now we've got other stuff to go through for the interview process. I don't want to get bogged down in just this one thing. I'm happy to talk about it with you later. And so far, everybody I've ever talked with has been totally fine with that. You're using stories to demonstrate your ability to deliver results that drive business success. And that's why we're getting hired. It doesn't matter what your role is. That's why we're getting hired, is because we're trying to drive business success. You can also offer helpful advice, right? It's okay to say when someone says there's some kind of problem, you can say, have you tried blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Me doing that has gotten people much more interested in hiring me repeatedly, and no one has ever said, how could you ask such a dumb question? Like, no one has criticized me ever for doing that. This is another way the hiring manager gets to understand your expertise, because you want to stand out from everybody else that has the exact same skill set on their resume, right? And by demonstrating that you've actually done something with those skills that matters in a really quick short story, they get it. Or they're like, oh, okay, awesome, right? And as always, you want to remember when you're going through and you're doing this kind of thing, when you're asking questions, script your questions in advance. So here's an interview script that I've used multiple times. Early on, I actually wrote these down and took them with me to the interview until I had them memorized. This is the preparation part, right? So the first question I ask with is, can you tell me about the role? And I always say that some version of HR requires vague job descriptions, but what can you tell me about this position that's really going to help me understand the role, right? This is going to get you all kinds of information that's not in the written description online. The next question is, what kind of challenges is the team focused on? And this is a question to ask if it isn't clear from the first answer. The first answer, they may tell you everything the team is focused on. Great, you can skip this one. But if they don't, you want to ask this question because then you get to understand the playing field and how your past experience can have impact on the company, right? At Google, when I asked this, there was one huge problem to be solved, right? They were like, here's the problem. And I was like, oh, okay, great, I got it. At another company that I went to, though, they were talking about scale and how the technology that they had in place wasn't going to keep up with their biggest clients. And they wanted a solution to that problem, right? The next question is, why are you looking to fill this role now? And this helps you understand about urgency and kind of what the hiring cycle could look like, right? Is something you need to solve like this week or this quarter, right? Very, very different kind of approaches when that's what's going on. I've heard answers that have ranged from, oh, it's part of our growth, to fears of big clients leaving if we don't get this hired right now, of marketing spend that's been wasted, and failing developer relationships, right? All kinds of answers for why now is important. The next question is, what kind of business impact would you see from this role? And hiring managers, again, they want to know that you're thinking about business impact. And it doesn't matter where you are in the company, right? Software engineer, business impact, because you're putting out the product that people are buying. If you're somebody in sales, obviously you're revenue generating, it's business impact, right? You could be someone who takes out the trash, and there's a business impact there because the people that work at the company are going to be happier when the trash cans are all empty than they will be if they come in and trash cans are full tomorrow morning. Often the answers to this question is the opposite of the fears they spoke about, right? The business impact is we want to make more revenue. We want to keep our biggest clients. We want people to love using our APIs. We want to have an ecosystem of developers that want to be hooked up to our platform, right? These are all business impacts. They're the opposites of the fears, right? And then what's the cost to the company if this role isn't filled quickly? And this gets the hiring manager thinking about their KPIs and urgency. You want them to be thinking about urgency and, oh my God, I need to hire somebody quickly. And this person that I'm talking with, they're asking really good business questions, right? They're not just sitting there waiting to be asked questions. They're being proactive in the conversation. And as somebody who's hired a fair number of people, if I'm interviewing you, I really like it when you're proactive in the conversation, because you're just sitting there waiting to be asked questions all day long. That's not the winning strategy, because I want to hire people who are going to be proactive about solving problems, right? I've been on both sides of that desk. Sometimes the cost is the same as the fears, and sometimes it's different details, right? Again, the answers to these questions that they say, they're all opportunities for you to talk about how you have solved problems in the past for other companies using your skills. Because they want to hire you to solve some kind of a problem, no matter what it is. And by the way, in the AI era, these kinds of questions are also indicators of how you would approach creating AI prompts. So this is a set of approaches that works across the board. So let's see. Before we jump into the next section, I want to ask, does anybody have any questions? You can throw them in the chat. Yeah. So, someone mentioned how they freeze up during interviews, right? Oh, nice. Somebody's already reading my book. I love it. So one of the ways that I have avoided freezing up in interviews is by starting off with, how's your day going, right? By being a warm human being and early on faking it that I had the confidence. I'll freely admit that. and being able to just talk with someone. Yes, as a matter of fact, it is, yeah. Being able to just start that conversation, I'm a human being, and being warm and open with them, and getting them to talk about something, right? And then having some empathy for whatever's going on. Like I've had interviews where someone said, oh, the day is kind of stressful because I had to get my kids to school this morning and there was a traffic jam and that made me late to get to the office and I'm feeling kind of backed up. And when that happens, I'm like, wow, I totally get it. I've had struggles getting my kids to school and making the first meetings. And do you want to wait a minute on the interview to just, calm down for a sec and let them be relaxed, right? I'm trying to be relaxed. I want them to be relaxed. What if the interview is not from the company, but from an agency? So I ask very much the exact same questions. And when I've had somebody who's approached me about a role and I ask them these kinds of questions, oftentimes, if they're from an agency, they don't know the answers to the questions. And so that's fine, because now the agency is going, oh my God, this person's actually really thinking about this position, rather than you just being stoic and quiet and not saying anything in the conversation, right? I go through the exact same questions and I let them say, I have no idea. I don't know. That's a good question for the hiring manager. And I'm totally fine with that. How do you get from how's your day going to asking important questions? So once they say whatever it is about how their day is going, I say, great, this is going to be interesting. I'm sure this interview will be interesting for me. And I've got some questions to start with. Is it okay if I ask my questions first? And so far, everybody I've ever said that to has said, of course, what are your questions, right? Because they expect candidates to have some kind of questions. They actually want the candidate to have a question. As somebody who's hired people, I've always wanted it. And so I just go from how's the day going to the first question, which is, can you tell me more about this role? Because the job description is kind of vague and I'd really like to understand better what's going on with this. And if anybody ever kind of seems like they're uncomfortable about me leading with the questions, I say, look, here's why I'm asking questions up front. If I think this is not a good role for me and that I'm not a good candidate, I will tell you, and then I'm going to leave early and give you your time back. And again, nobody says no to that, right? I can't remember it all. Yeah. So that's any other questions? Oh, how much prep is too much prep? Okay, this is completely counter to everything anybody else ever said. Aside from figuring out the name of the company and what they did, I've almost never prepped for any interview at all. And to make it even worse, and by the way, all my roles have been engineering and product management. Only once in my whole career have I gotten a job at a company where I already understood their tech stack. I've learned the tech stack in the company every time except once. And the reason is I get hired to solve problems. And thank you. I get hired to solve problems, right? And everybody in engineering is hired to solve problems. That should be the start of every job description. We're hiring you to solve problems. Because I'm telling stories about how I've solved problems in the past of all different kinds, directly tied to their problems, right? They're like, oh, this guy knows how to solve blah, 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 whatever it happens to be, right? The other thing is, after you've learned some number of programming languages, even if you're a staff engineer or whatever, after you've learned 2 or 3 programming languages, maybe 4, the next incremental language is actually quite easy because you understand all the fundamentals. And if syntax is your problem, somebody else on the team can help you get the syntax figured out if you can design an algorithm effectively, right? As I've been moving up the ladder and having less and less time to write code, my ability to code has become basically irrelevant. Nobody asks about my ability to code. They want to know that I understand the architecture and why all these different pieces are there and what have you done with AWS or any other cloud provider for that matter. But the nitty gritty of syntactically how to write code has become irrelevant. So yeah, my prep level has been tiny. in terms of understanding the infrastructure in the company. Yeah. Oh, let's see. I'm trying to see, is there any other questions? And by the way, you can do this at, like, doesn't matter what your age is. Yeah. I've coached both of my kids on how to do this with job interviews. The one caveat I will say, though, is if you're looking for a government job, this might not work because governments have very strict requirements in some contexts, probably not all of them, but I know my older son applied for a government job and they absolutely refused to let him ask any questions at all. It was completely outside of their scope. My book is on Amazon. Yeah. And at the end of this, I'll put up a link so you can find it. So bonus, here's the bonus part of this, which is career advancement. I've had multiple promotions in the course of my career. I've never asked for one yet. Every time I've gotten a promotion, it's been, I'm doing something and some executive goes, "Hey, Bill, can I borrow you for a minute?" And I'm like, "Sure, what's up?" And they pull me in their office and close the door and go, "Hey, you've been doing this thing kind of on the side part-time that benefits the company. We want you to do a lot more of it. We're giving you a new title. We're giving you a new responsibility. Go find a replacement for yourself. Congratulations." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. Awesome. Thank you." So what's it take to make that happen? So to get advancement in a company, you have to be noticed, right? No one gets a promotion because they're invisible. And the way to become visible is by talking with people in the company and figuring out how to help them out. And I built a recipe for how to make that happen because I realized in retrospect that I was doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so either A, I was getting promoted, or B, my team was getting offered the best projects in the company. And both of those are wins from my perspective. If my team is delighted about the projects that we're getting, then I'm super happy, right? As the guy that's making the team, running the team, if they're all happy about the projects that we're getting, then I'm golden, right? So the starting point is networking inside the company. So I send an email to somebody in a different organization of the business. So I'm in engineering, I'm reaching out to somebody in marketing or sales or support or even the financial office, right? And the email is, "Hi, so-and-so, I work in engineering and I'm curious to learn more about your org. Would you be willing to chat for 15 minutes? I want to understand your work and see if my team can help you." And I send two or three of these a week. Typically I get 1 to 3 yes responses, which is completely fine because that's fits in the amount of free time I can have available on my calendar. When we meet, I ask these questions. What got you to join the company? And there's no bad answers to any of these questions, right? What got you to join this company? What's your favorite part of the work that you do? Because I want to start off with them talking about a happy thing, right? What's the biggest friction that you or your team face? And that is a super insightful thing to ask them because you will hear about struggles that are not coming to you through official channels, right? This is all about back channel, getting knowledge that's just not official information, right? From somebody in engineering, it's really hard for the sales team to get knowledge through the org chart and back down to me because it's like the game of telephone, right? The sales guys tell their boss about a problem. Their boss may or may not tell the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, or VP of Sales, who may or may not tell the CTO, who may or may not tell the Director of Engineering, who may or may not tell me. There's a whole lot of cutouts where that knowledge can disappear and I don't hear about it. So I get proactive and I go talk to people and ask them about their friction. You want to document the friction, whatever it happens to be. And then go and talk to your team and see if you can help, right? If the team can help, then build the solution and talk to your boss about it, right? Explain why you're doing it, explain the context. I always frame it in financials, right? This is the this is what it's costing sales team. This is the struggle they're having. And we can build this solution for a fraction of the expense that sales has, and nobody else is touching it, right? This becomes a new item in my coding backlog, like standard engineering stuff. We're not totally cowboying it. And before we build it, I'll usually go back and ask to get more information. I'm doing regular product management kind of stuff to figure out what it is they need. And sometimes they even like, I'll give them wireframes and say, hey, is this kind of something like this gonna help you out? I repeat this cycle and I do it over and over again. And I talk to people all the time about what's going on. And sometimes I'll talk to people and it takes 6, 9, 12 months until they tell me they have friction, right? The point is to be asking and to be fixing things. Yes, this is a little bit extra work, but you get promoted for it and you get better projects and you get noticed. You want to be patient as you're repeating this and recognize you're investing in your future, right? The other reason to do this is not getting laid off, right? I've been at companies that have had layoffs, and I've been at companies that have gone from 350 people down to 5. I've been one of the last 5, which gave me more time to look for my next role, right? And so you'd rather have that controllability than not, right? Okay, let's see. Go back to the chat again because somebody has questions. And let's see. So let's see. Yeah, put questions in the chat. I'm happy to talk to you about that. Prep order of operation for first interview. So company basics, job description, and what is it they do that makes money, right? How does that work? And have some idea of how the org that you're going into has an impact on that, right? That's really all that it's pretty basic. It's like 30 minutes, maybe 45, very, very simple. Super encouraged to sell the interview why you relate to the role and why your background aligns with it. So Tammy has a question about sell it to the interviewer why you relate to the role. So I prefer to prove it to them, right? I don't think about selling it to them in that way. I talk about how I've already solved problems that are very much like what they're looking to get solved. I've already got experience, right? I've got the street cred. And I don't try to sell them that I'm the best candidate. I want them, and this may be counterintuitive, I want them to be curious about how I've solved problems, right? Like one of the companies that I was at, they were terrified because their architecture, their whole system that supported Fortune 100 clients was completely out of they had maxed out, right? Their server stack was maxed out. They were crashing on high traffic days. They needed a complete new architecture from scratch. When I came in, we sat down and started talking about it. I started talking with the team about it. The CTO estimated this was going to be a 15-month project if everything worked out really, really well. The problem was they had a 9-month window because they were going to hit a really big traffic spike. And we had to actually launch in 9 months. And they said, look, here's the deal. We think this will take 15 months. You only got 9. What do you want to do? And so I talked to the team and they said, sure, we'll do it, right? We got it out the door in 8. We had extra planning time. When I talked to execs about that, their first question is, how the hell did you do that? Again, the CTO says 15 months. How'd you knock 7 months off of his estimate, right? I'd be happy to tell you about that later, sir, but we've got more stuff to talk about. We can have another conversation about what we did later on, right? That's the response. If the executives are curious about you, then that's the big win, right? If the executives think you're just a cog in the wheel and you're just a replaceable metal water bottle, then you're not going to win, right? This is all about, I want to stand out. I want to be noticed, both in the interview and once I'm in the company. Yeah. Retired nurse, pivoting into tech. No hands-on, and I'm scared to interview entry-level job. So, Alethea, I hope I pronounced that right. So awesome, congratulations. I got into tech with 0 programming experience, and no computer science from college. And I did it by volunteering to help a startup. And I did a little bit of stuff to help them out, and then they offered me a job. And startups, I think, are the place everybody should start, because there's always startups that need help. And if you want pragmatic real world experience and you can volunteer to help them out, they will love you for it, right? Yeah, and so, and be vocal about that, like, hey, how can I help you, right? Like, I've got some time, I know how to do stuff, and away you go, right? So I'm at Hacker Dojo in Mountain View, and there's multiple different entrepreneurs here that are working on startups. They'd all be happy to have volunteer help, right? So, I mean, I know it exists right here. And I know that there's other places, at least in California, that have incubators and things like that, very, very, very much similar. So yeah. I want to work with the senior community. I'm 64 years old. Okay. Tammy, good luck. Thank you. We want to work with senior communities. Okay, so find somebody that wants to work with seniors. Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. There's lots of people that are doing different kinds of things. Like, there's a guy here who's building a startup around helping veterans, right? Helping veterans get things when they're in critically bad shape. And he wants to build an application, an ecosystem to have that problem get solved. So I think irrespective of the audience you're looking to help, it's just be curious and network and talk to people and find out. Yeah, so there's lots of veteran organizations out there that would be more than happy to have a volunteer that would come and join and would help out and get that experience. So you're totally in the right place. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to point you to some people that I know. Have I ever had pushback from a boss? No, I've never had pushback from a boss. As a matter of fact, I've had bosses thank me for finding problems that they didn't know existed in other parts of the organization, right? And it's just because I'm talking to people, you know. It's surprising to me that people don't back channel more, because there's so often friction in other parts of the organization that you can help with, right? That your team will go, oh, well, that's a cakewalk, right? That's super easy to do, but you don't know about it, right? And the CTO doesn't know about it. You know, I was at a company where my team kept the payroll running for 3 or 4, maybe 5 pay cycles, because we got a new payroll processor, and for some reason the data migration out of the time card system wasn't getting translated right to load into the payroll system. And I walked in one day to the CFO's office, and I was talking with their bookkeeper for a minute, and she was in a complete panic, because she was afraid that her boss would have to hand cut checks to the whole company that night, and that he wouldn't be able to do it in time to not get fined by the states where employees live that weren't California, right? Because checks wouldn't be able to go out till the next day. That can create problems, right? And I said, well, what's the data look like? What's the big deal? Thanks for buying the book. I appreciate it. And so I said, well, let me see the data. Maybe my team can fix it. Like, translate data, like data files, not a big deal for us to manipulate, right? She gave me the data dump. I took it to our database expert on the team, and I said, here's what this looks like, and here's the template for what it needs to look like. And she goes, oh yeah, it'll take me like 5 or 10 minutes. I'll be right back. Like, just, come back in 10 minutes and I'll be done. And I said, great. And I went back, and 10 minutes later, and she was like, oh yeah, I already emailed you the file. It's all good to go. And I said, great. I forwarded it off to the bookkeeper. Everybody got paid. My team got paid, right? Everybody was happy because I wanted to ask a question, right? That problem wasn't going to come to me from my CTO. And so next payroll cycle, I was like, hey, do you need help? She's like, we still don't have a thing working right. Can you do your magic again? And I'm like, hey, no problem. Got the file, gave it to the database expert. Took her like 2 minutes. It was a huge win. So you want to find out about that friction. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? Okay. So here's a quick recap. Here's what we talked about. A simple system for turning social anxiety into social confidence. how to hack interviews, and a recipe for career advancement. And really anybody can do this, right? Just like doing math. If you can add, subtract, multiply, divide, you can do this. It's just a matter of putting in the practice. That's really the whole thing. Anybody wants to stay connected? Here's some links. My LinkedIn, you can find the book. I'd say just like take a picture of this, and then and if you're interested in a course, I've been thinking about doing a course around this. This is the URL. If you're interested in a course, let me know, and just a simple Google form, and we will go from there. This has been awesome. Thank you, folks. I appreciate it.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I don't see that there are any other questions, and we are over
Cool.
the top of the hour, so I want to thank you
Yeah.
for spending more time than you probably had budgeted for, and leaving an impact with our little
Thank
audience
you.
here that's learned a
Yeah.
lot more about how to interact and communicate in the workplace.
Awesome. Yeah. Glad to be able to help.
Yeah.
It's such a being able to, like, it's so much changed in my life when I got over
Yeah.
my social anxiety. It's like I said, things where I thought there were walls became open doors. And I was like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. It's transformational. So I think everybody and anybody can do this. Yeah.
Let's see. He
Oh,
already did ask a question. Let's
someone had
make
a question,
sure.
Harry had a question. I'm sorry I missed it, Harry. What was your question? I'm scrolling back and looking at it.
I'm doing the same.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, if you can is your contact info in this chat. Yeah, let me redrop that here.
Oh, is it the same situation as this today? Is what the same situation? What's the context?
Yeah. Well, Hiari, if you have that question in the context still, drop it to Bill on his LinkedIn and the job market when you don't have experience.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you don't have experience, volunteer to work with a startup. That's how I got started in tech. Um, and it's, startups always need help. And there's all kinds of people out there that want help. One of the guys here is actually doing a hackathon later this month. I'll post about it on LinkedIn. And um, what can you help with? You can help with anything, right? Like I started off doing QA stuff, right? They were like, here's how this should work. Go run it and see if it breaks, right? I was doing manual QA, which was good because I got to see how the product actually worked and where it threw errors. And then over time, as I was starting to learn how to code, I actually was able to go look in the code and see where it blew up, right? So you can do anything, right? QA is easy. You can write documentation. You can do research. There's all kinds of things you can do. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are here at the end. And so as we conclude, I'm going to leave you with our final question. If nobody else took anything away from this, or if they came in here and they heard everything,
Mm-hmm.
what do you consider the most important takeaway from today's webinar?
The most important, I think the most important thing is that social anxiety is not a biological problem. It's an education and a practice problem, just like math. And so I'm not great at math, but I can add, subtract, multiply, divide. I know how to do geometry. I can do fractions and percentages. I can do algebra, right? I'm not as good a speaker as, I don't know, somebody who's really Barack Obama, right? People talk about Barack being a really good speaker. I'm not at his level yet, but I'm way, way better than I was 10 years ago, right? And it's because I'm practicing. And so knowing that it's skills, it's practice, it's repetition, I think that's the most valuable thing we can have.
Awesome. And then Michael asks, what can you help with if you don't have a lot of tech experience?
Um, you can anything. Yeah, you can do anything. I'm plugging all the links from that last slide into the chat, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
I
Yeah.
realized I got rid of this when I quit sharing. So you can help with QA, you can help with research, you can help with talking to prospects, right? You can do, product management kind of stuff. Um, when I started off, um, early on, like literally anything that came in the door that somebody wanted to get figured out, they would give to me. So I learned how to configure routers. I learned how to wire a building for Ethernet. I learned how all the wiring worked in the buildings. This is back before everybody had Wi-Fi, right? Um, I got to learn a bunch of things because I was there for free. And so the company was willing to say, here, go figure this out, right? Now that we have AI and we've got all these YouTube videos, you can learn really quickly a whole bunch of stuff about how you contribute to the team in a very, very short amount of time. And if you're volunteering to help them, there's a lot more slack that they're willing
Mhm.
to be comfortable with you not being as productive as fast.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I'll be
Thanks,
sending you the
everyone.
recording, and we have many other events going on Albert's List. Sign up on Eventbrite today, and we will see you soon. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
rest of your Tuesday and stay cool. See you, everybody. Bye.
We'll see y'all.